There's something terrifying about realizing that your life might not be yours. Your emotions, your guilt, your reactions. What if most of it was never yours to begin with? What if you've been carrying other people's pain, playing roles you didn't choose, and losing pieces of yourself in the name of being good, strong, or empathetic? Carl Jung believed that the real danger in life doesn't come from what we see, but from what we never question. And right now, there may be forces shaping your mind that have nothing to do with who you truly are. In this video, we're going to uncover 6 psychological traps that Jung warned about. Traps that hide in relationships, family dynamics, emotional patterns, and even within your own kindness. These are not stories about bad people. They're revelations about how unconscious pain moves through us, how it controls us, and how it steals our clarity. The scariest part? It all feels normal. Until one day, you wake up exhausted, anxious, lost, and can't explain why. But once you learn to recognize these invisible forces, projection, persona, emotional fusion, you'll never see yourself or others the same way again. And more importantly, you'll learn how to break free. You'll learn how to love without losing yourself, how to help without becoming a hostage, and how to protect your mind from silent invasions that don't knock before entering. If any part of you has felt drained, manipulated, or emotionally overwhelmed, you need to see this. Your freedom begins with awareness. There's a silent war happening around you, and chances are, you're already a soldier in it, without even knowing. This war isn't fought with fists or weapons. It's fought with emotions, assumptions, and invisible forces that enter your mind without knocking. This is the war of projection. Carl Jung warned us that what people refuse to confront in themselves doesn't vanish. It searches for a host. And if you're kind, empathetic, or even just emotionally available, that host is probably you. Every time someone blames you for their pain, shames you for your joy, or makes you feel responsible for their chaos, there's a projection at work. But how do you defend yourself from a weapon you can't see? Projection is when someone unloads their unresolved pain onto you, confusing your identity with their inner war. It's like emotional graffiti. They paint their fears on your walls and call it truth. For Jung, this wasn't just a psychological quirk. It was a defense mechanism rooted in the unconscious. People see in others what they cannot tolerate in themselves. Their anger becomes your problem, their insecurity becomes your insult, and their shame becomes your fault. Over time, if you're not careful, you start believing it. You internalize the noise. You carry emotions that don't belong to you, and it slowly erodes your sense of self. You begin to question yourself constantly. Was I too harsh? Am I the selfish one? You lose sleep replaying conversations, trying to decode someone else's pain as if it were your own. But here's the truth. Projection doesn't just distort your image. It rewrites your story. It pulls you into roles you never chose. Villain, savior, traitor. And because projection operates under the radar of consciousness, it often feels like love, loyalty, or even responsibility. But it's none of those things. It's manipulation wrapped in confusion. And confusion is the perfect condition for control. Think about your daily life. That coworker who always seems threatened by your calm. That family member who blames you for every emotional storm. That partner who turns your joy into an attack. These aren't isolated incidents. They're symptoms of a deeper infection. The unconscious invading the conscious through subtle, repetitive projections. You become a mirror, not a person. A screen onto which others play out their unprocessed pasts. And unless you become aware of this, you'll carry stories that were never yours to begin with. But why are some people more vulnerable to projection than others? Jung believed the answer lies in empathy, one of humanity's greatest gifts, but also one of its most dangerous traps. When you're deeply empathetic, you don't just hear someone's pain, you absorb it, you try to solve it. You feel responsible for easing what they refuse to face, and in doing so, you open the door. Not to love, but to psychic confusion. It's like offering someone your jacket and waking up with their entire wardrobe on your back. You didn't agree to carry this weight, but now it's yours. And let's be clear, projection is rarely intentional. These people aren't evil, they're unconscious. And that's exactly what makes them dangerous. A person who knows their darkness can manage it, but someone who's blind to it? They'll weaponize it without knowing. They'll hijack your emotions while thinking they're expressing their own. They'll cross your boundaries while believing they're respecting them. Jung called this psychic blindness. When the ego refuses to acknowledge the shadow finds another path to express itself. And that path is usually another person. So how do you protect yourself from this invisible invasion? The first step is radical self-awareness. You need to become fluent in your own emotions, so you can detect when a foreign feeling enters the room. You need to track your guilt, analyze your self-doubt, and most importantly, ask, is this mine or was it handed to me? Because the unconscious doesn't knock. It slips in through your compassion. And once it does, it starts rewriting your reality. But once you see the script, you can stop playing the part. And here's where the twist begins. Because the story of projection doesn't stop at victimhood. Sometimes, without knowing, you become the projector. Sometimes the weight you thought you were carrying for others is actually your own unresolved pain leaking outward. In the next topic, we'll meet the unconscious manipulator. Not the monster in the story, but the wounded child behind the curtain, whose silence speaks louder than words, and whose pain becomes a trap for anyone who dares to care. You probably know someone like this. They don't scream, they don't hit, they don't even ask for much. But somehow, after every interaction, you feel exhausted, like you've been through a storm that left no trace on the outside but shattered something inside. This is the unconscious manipulator. They don't set traps deliberately. They are the trap, not out of evil, but out of pain. Carl Jung taught us that unintegrated emotions don't disappear. They spill out, looking for resolution. And if you're nearby, you become the container. You feel like you're helping. But what's really happening is far more dangerous. The unconscious manipulator isn't trying to hurt you. They're trying to survive. Their pain is so deep, so buried, that they don't even recognize it. So they offload it, subtly, through guilt, through silence, through emotional dependency disguised as love. You find yourself constantly adjusting to keep them stable. You say less, you feel less. You even shrink yourself to avoid setting them off. But here's the truth. They are not reacting to you. They are reacting to their past, using your present. And the longer you stay, the more blurred the line becomes between care and captivity. This dynamic is especially cruel because it wears the mask of intimacy. It feels like connection. It looks like vulnerability. But it's not. It's enmeshment. You're not being seen. You're being used. Not out of malice, but out of unconscious programming. These individuals were often emotionally abandoned themselves, and now they recreate that drama with you as the new player. You become the emotional crutch, the stabilizer, the hero. And if you step away, even for a breath, you're suddenly the villain. Jung explained that unrecognized pain has a gravitational pull. It draws people into its orbit. The unconscious manipulator isn't seeking support. They're seeking someone to carry what they refuse to face. And if you're the strong one, the empathetic one, the healer, you are the perfect target. Your strength becomes your curse. Because the more you give, the more you disappear. And still, it will never be enough. Why? Because you're trying to heal a wound that isn't yours, with tools that aren't meant for it. This manipulation happens without a single word. Sometimes it's a sigh, a look, a withdrawal, and suddenly you're on high alert. You rush to fix things. You apologize without knowing why. You bend your boundaries in the name of love. But love without clarity is just confusion in a costume. What you're really doing is abandoning yourself to save someone who won't even enter the battlefield of their own soul. And Jung warned us, when we protect others from their shadow, we inherit it. This is where the cycle deepens. Because once you're inside it, you begin to believe that you must stay, that your presence is essential, that leaving would make you cruel. But here's the hard truth. Staying may be what's cruelest to you. The unconscious manipulator doesn't change through comfort. They change through confrontation. Not with you, but with themselves. And every time you step in to soothe their storm, you rob them of the chance to face it. You become the buffer between them and growth. And this is where many people feel stuck. But they're not bad people. Of course they're not. That's why it's so hard. This isn't about blaming. It's about waking up. Because your nervous system is not a sacrifice. Your sanity is not a donation. You deserve relationships where care is mutual, not one-sided. And as hard as it is, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and say, I am not your therapist. I am not your bandage. I am not your savior. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. Now imagine someone who's not only trapped in this kind of emotional dependency, but has built their entire identity around hiding it. Someone who wears a perfect mask every day, saying all the right things, smiling at the right moments, while burying a storm inside. In the next topic, we'll step into the world of the mask wearer and explore why the persona we show the world can become the cage that suffocates who we really are. Not every lie is spoken. Some are worn, on the face, in the posture, in the perfectly timed smile. You've seen it. Maybe you've even lived it. The person who always has it together, who never complains, who's always pleasant, always agreeable. But beneath the surface, there's something hollow, something rehearsed. Jung called this the persona, the social mask we wear to survive the demands of the world. And while it's necessary to have one, the danger begins when the mask becomes your identity. The mask wearer isn't just pretending. They've forgotten they're pretending. They believe they are their role, the good employee, the ideal partner, the loyal friend. But deep down, their true self is suffocating, buried under layers of performance. Jung warned that identification with the persona blocks individuation. When you live for the image others expect, you disconnect from your own depth. You stop asking what you feel. You only ask, what should I feel to be accepted? People like this don't explode. They don't manipulate, at least not consciously. Instead, they demand that everyone around them participate in their performance. You're expected to match their image, to smile back, to avoid mess, to never bring too much emotion, too much truth. And if you do, you'll notice it instantly. The tension, the withdrawal, the discomfort. Because your authenticity threatens their illusion, and illusions are fragile things. In everyday life, this dynamic shows up in families, workplaces, even friendships. You say something real, and it gets ignored. You express sadness, and they shift the topic. You reveal vulnerability, and they offer a cliché. These are not coincidences, they're defense mechanisms. The mask wearer isn't rejecting you. They're running from what you've awakened in them, the buried parts they've spent years trying to hide even from themselves. The saddest part? These people often seem happy on the outside, but inside, there's a quiet misery, a sense of being unseen, even when surrounded. Because when you live as a mask, no one ever meets the real you. And after a while, you begin to forget who that is. You become a collection of reactions, expectations, performances. Your soul goes quiet. And that silence is not peace, it's exile. If you live with someone like this, you'll eventually notice the cost. You start censoring yourself. You play it safe. You laugh when you don't want to. You mirror their politeness, and slowly, you lose your voice. Not because they asked you to, but because you unconsciously agreed to enter their script. And once you're in the play, it's hard to remember that real life was ever unscripted. But here's the warning. Behind every rigid persona, something is brewing. Because emotions don't vanish when ignored. They ferment. They build pressure. And when they finally break through, they don't knock. They erupt. In the next topic, we'll step into the storm behind the smile. The repressed shadow. The part of the self that, when denied for too long, doesn't fade. It strikes. Some people never raise their voice. They never curse, never argue, never cry. They pride themselves on being calm, balanced, even spiritual. But spend enough time with them, and you'll feel it. That quiet tension, like standing near a fault line before an earthquake. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the parts of ourselves we refuse to see, so we bury them. But buried isn't dead. And when the shadow is ignored for too long, it doesn't disappear, it detonates. The repressed shadow isn't obvious. It wears a mask of goodness. These people are helpful, disciplined, even admired. But there's a cost. They can't tolerate weakness. They get unnerved by authenticity. They subtly judge those who express pain, because it reminds them of their own, locked away like a monster in the basement of the soul. And the more they repress it, the more power it gains. Jung warned, the stronger the persona, the darker the shadow. In daily life, this person seems reliable, until suddenly, they're not. One day, a small inconvenience triggers a massive reaction. A missed text, a change of plans, a minor disagreement. And suddenly the air turns heavy. You're being punished, not for what you did, but for everything they've swallowed for years. Rage, envy, guilt. All of it erupts, and you're in the blast zone. And they'll insist they're just being honest or finally expressing themselves. But that's not expression. That's emotional combustion. It's important to understand. The shadow isn't evil. It contains not just darkness, but power, creativity, sexuality, vitality. But when it's denied, it becomes poison. A person repressing their shadow is like a house sealing off one room and pretending it doesn't exist. But that room fills with pressure, with mold, with fire. Eventually, it takes the whole house with it, and anyone nearby gets burned. Living with someone like this is walking through a minefield. You're never sure what will set them off. So you become cautious. You tiptoe. You say less. Feel less. Until you realize you're not protecting them from themselves. You're protecting yourself from a part of them they refuse to meet. And the saddest part? They think they're in control. But repression is not control. It's delay. And when that delay ends, someone always pays the price. This dynamic often hides in moralism. People who are overly rigid, who speak in rules, who preach purity and perfection. But underneath, there's a storm waiting for permission to break free. Jung saw this clearly. When we repress parts of ourselves, we project them onto others. We see sin in others because we cannot bear to see it in us. And so begins a cycle of judgment, shame, and silent violence. And this violence doesn't just affect the repressor. It spreads. It makes you doubt your natural impulses. It turns joy into guilt, passion into shame. You begin to censor your laughter, your pain, your needs, just to keep the peace. But this isn't peace. It's self-abandonment. You're living under emotional tyranny, ruled by someone who has declared war on their own humanity. What's most tragic is that this shadow could be transformed, integrated, owned. But instead, it's hidden, feared, weaponized. And now you're the target. Not because you deserve it, but because you're available. And yet, there's a more dangerous form of this repression. One that wraps itself in virtue, that disguises its fear as righteousness. In the next topic, we'll meet the moral controller. The one who doesn't just repress the shadow, but builds a prison of guilt for everyone else who dares to feel what they won't. Not every weapon looks like a fist. Some look like virtues. Some sound like advice. Others hide behind the soft voice of concern. This is the domain of the moral controller, the person who transforms guilt into a tool, ethics into a leash, and morality into a cage. Carl Jung saw this pattern as one of the most insidious forms of unconscious repression, because it doesn't look like control. It looks like virtue. But behind every rigid moralist is a shadow screaming to be acknowledged. The moral controller doesn't yell. They correct. They don't attack. They guide. But the outcome is the same. You feel small, wrong, defective. They carry the aura of righteousness. They speak with certainty. And that certainty is suffocating. Why? Because it leaves no room for complexity, no space for imperfection, no permission to be human. And most dangerously, it turns your natural impulses into sins you must repent for. In families, this archetype appears as the overly strict parent. In religious spaces, it shows up as spiritual superiority. At work, it's the colleague who hides their bitterness behind rules and protocols. But the common thread is always the same. They don't want truth. They want control. Jung warned that when morality is used as a mask, the shadow behind it grows more aggressive. The more someone preaches purity, the more likely they are hiding chaos. The danger here is psychological erosion. You begin to self-police. You apologize for being tired. You justify your joy. You downplay your desires. Not because they're wrong, but because someone made you believe they are. The moral controller doesn't need to yell to dominate you. They just need you to internalize their voice. Once that happens, they own space inside your head. And what's terrifying is how convincing they can be. They truly believe they are helping. They think they're correcting, enlightening, protecting you. But what they're actually doing is projecting, casting their rejected self onto others. You become the sinner, so they can feel like the saint. You carry the shame, so they can feel pure. It's a transaction based on unconscious fear, not truth. This role often develops in people who were once deeply judged themselves. Now, they've become what once hurt them, except cloaked in moral justification. And this makes them blind. They can't see the pain they cause because they're too convinced of their own goodness. They believe they are saving you. But in truth, they are saving themselves from the terror of looking inward. The most devastating part? You start to believe them. You question your desires. You repress your instincts. You shrink to fit their version of good. And the world becomes smaller, colder, heavier. Not because of who you are, but because of who they need you to be. And slowly you become a puppet, dangling from strings made of guilt, shame, and fear of disappointing someone whose love depends on your obedience. But sometimes the strings snap. Sometimes the guilt turns to rage. And that's where things get explosive. Because while the moral controller is driven by repression, the next archetype is driven by chaos itself. In the next topic, we'll explore the complexed individual. Someone whose unhealed wounds don't just project, they take over. One moment they love you, the next they destroy you, and they don't even know why. One moment they're warm, generous, laughing with you like nothing could ever go wrong. The next moment, a storm hits. A simple word, a glance, a forgotten text, and suddenly they shut down, explode, accuse. You're left confused, hurt, questioning what just happened. But here's the truth. It wasn't about you. It was about a complex, a cluster of emotion and memory buried deep in their unconscious, now hijacking the present. Jung called complexes splinter personalities, and once triggered, they act through a person like a ghost reliving its past. The complexed individual isn't evil, they're unstable. Not by choice, but by psychic architecture. They are ruled by past wounds that haven't been metabolized. Abandonment, rejection, betrayal. These aren't just memories, they're live wires. And the worst part? Even they don't understand their reactions. They think they're being logical. But in reality, they're fighting battles from years ago, with you as the unknowing opponent. If you've ever walked on eggshells around someone, you've felt this. You avoid topics, you shrink your needs, you monitor your tone, all to prevent setting them off. But this isn't peacekeeping, it's self-erasure. Because no matter how careful you are, something will eventually awaken their complex. And when it does, they won't see you. They'll see a ghost. The parent who neglected them, the lover who left, the friend who betrayed, and you'll pay for what someone else did. The cycle is exhausting. After every outburst, they might apologize, cry, promise change. And for a while, things feel good again. You see their warmth, their depth, their sincerity. But then it happens again. The cycle restarts. And each time your sense of reality erodes just a little more. You start to question yourself, your memory, your truth. Until one day, you don't know where you end and their chaos begins. Jung taught that complexes live in everyone, but when they're unconscious, they become tyrants. They speak for us, feel for us, decide for us. The complexed individual hasn't met their inner wounds. They've been colonized by them, and if you're close to someone like this, their complexes begin to colonize you. You absorb their fear, their instability, their emotional volatility, and eventually, your nervous system gets rewired around their unpredictability. This is how trauma spreads, not just through events, but through relationships. The complexed person may have been hurt deeply in the past, but if they don't take responsibility for their healing, they become the source of harm in the present. And sadly, the people they hurt most are often the ones trying hardest to help. The ones who stay, who love, who try to understand. But love is not enough when the other person is being pulled by forces they refuse to face. What makes this dynamic even more dangerous is its inconsistency. It creates a kind of emotional addiction. You crave the good moments, so you tolerate the bad ones. You live for the highs and endure the lows. And soon, the chaos feels normal. You forget what calm even is. But this is not a relationship. It's a trauma loop. And no matter how much love you pour in, it will never be enough to heal what they won't own. But some people don't explode. They don't shift rapidly or accuse you outright. They drain you quietly, slowly, day after day, until there's nothing left. In the next topic, we'll meet the psychic vampire. Not someone who screams, but someone who clings, who feeds on your energy without ever giving anything back. And by the time you notice, you're already empty. Some people don't take from you violently. They take softly. So softly you don't even notice it at first. They come as the needy friend, the fragile partner, the forever wounded soul who just needs a little more time. And at first you give. Of course you do. You listen. You stay up late. You reassure, comfort, sacrifice. But eventually you feel it. The fatigue that no sleep can cure. The dull ache of constant emotional labor. This is the psychic vampire. They don't want your company. They want your energy. Jung didn't use the term psychic vampire directly, but he described the symbiotic bond, an unconscious fusion between two psyches where one person becomes an emotional extension of the other. The psychic vampire thrives in this kind of bond. They attach themselves to people who are empathetic, nurturing, emotionally open. Why? Because they don't want to grow. They want to be carried. Not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear of responsibility. Fear of being alone. Fear of meeting themselves. This person isn't always dramatic. In fact, they might be soft-spoken, kind, deeply sensitive. But behind that sensitivity is a bottomless pit. No matter how much love you pour in, it's never enough. They're always in crisis, always on the edge. And you become the rescuer, the constant giver. Until one day, you realize you don't even remember what your needs feel like anymore. Your entire life has become a response to someone else's emotional hunger. The psychic vampire doesn't manipulate through aggression, but through helplessness. and that helplessness is weaponized. If you set a boundary, they act hurt. If you take space, they panic. If you say no, they become cold or disappear. Suddenly, you feel guilty for having limits. You feel selfish for needing rest, cold for wanting silence. That's not love. That's entrapment. And it doesn't come with chains. It comes with 1,000 small moments of guilt and obligation. What makes this dynamic especially dangerous is its slowness. It doesn't hit all at once. It builds. Day after day, a little more of you disappears. You stop dreaming, stop laughing, stop feeling excited about life. Not because you're depressed, but because you've become someone else's emotional sponge. They're not healing, they're outsourcing their pain. And you've become the host. Jung warned us that unconscious relationships blur identity. In symbiosis, the line between me and you dissolves. And that's exactly what happens here. You stop knowing where they end and where you begin. You think you're helping, but you're actually dissolving, becoming less you, more them. And the longer it goes on, the harder it is to leave. Because now your self-worth is tied to their stability. Their needs become your purpose. The psychic vampire doesn't want to hurt you, but they will. Because they're not looking for a partner. They're looking for an emotional parent, someone to hold all the feelings they can't process. And if you're not careful, you'll spend years in a one-way relationship, calling it love, while bleeding from the inside out. And by the time you realize it, the damage is already done. But there's something even more subtle than this. Something that begins not with the other person's neediness, but with your empathy. In the next topic, we'll explore the loss of self and symbiosis. The terrifying moment when helping turns into disappearing, and love becomes a slow erasure of who you are. You've just seen the invisible, not monsters in the dark, but patterns in the light. Patterns that drain your energy, distort your identity, and rewrite your emotions without your consent. Now that you've named them, projection, repression, persona, fusion, the question becomes, what will you do with this awareness? Will you keep pretending everything's fine while silently collapsing? Will you keep playing roles in relationships that cost you your peace? Or will you choose clarity over confusion, truth over performance, freedom over guilt? The people around you may not change, but you can. And when you do, the dynamic shifts. You stop rescuing people who refuse to swim. You stop blaming yourself for pain that isn't yours. You stop confusing empathy with erasure. Jung didn't promise an easy road, but he did promise a powerful one, the path of individuation. A life where your boundaries are strong, your love is clean, and your soul is finally heard. So here's your next step. Start small. Choose one dynamic that resonated with you. Write about it. Reflect on where it shows up in your life, and where you've been silent. Then make one decision today that honors your truth. And if this video helped you see something clearly, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Comment below which archetype hit hardest for you. Someone out there needs to read your words to wake up too. And if you want to keep growing, keep seeing, and keep peeling back the layers, subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications. Because your mind is not a battlefield. It's a home, and it's time you reclaimed it.